Over the last few days, Swedish Foreign Minister Ms. Maria Malmer Stenergard met with Eritrea's Foreign Minister Mr. Osman Saleh, and according to official information from Eritrean Minister of Information, they focused basically on a couple of things. One, with the foreign minister, it has something to do with bilateral relations between Eritrea and Sweden, probably includes several topics, and including the peace and security of Africa and the Red Sea region. That's obvious. Then the other part, the second part of her visit, included meeting with with Eritrea's Minister of Labor and Social Welfare, Ms. Lul Gabrab, and the topic for that is about social justice. Let's call it just social justice briefing. It's where the minister updated Eritrea's social welfare minister updated the Swedish foreign minister on what's going on in terms of social development, social justice in Eritrea. And this is what I'm going to be focusing about today. Now, whenever governments talk about social justice, sustainable development goals like the SDGs, naturally there is skepticism. There is justified or not. It's natural to be skeptical. So instead of referring to rhetoric and what their intention is, if it is true or not, I want today to make it something simpler and hopefully more useful as well. I basically want to measure the claim, not against official press releases, not against like political narratives, but against actual UN benchmarks. Because when we talk about social justice globally, we are talking about there's measurable sustainable development goals that the United Nations, the UN, puts together, and we're going to compare Eritrea's results to that. So why? Because at the end of the day, the SDGs, as they are known, they are not Eritrea's goals, they are not Swedish goals, they are not the Western world goals. They are actually internationally accepted, internationally delivered and debated and accepted metrics of outcomes for poverty, for healthcare, for education, water, energy, governance, security, and so on. So the question at the end of the day is, related to our topic today, when Eritrean officials point out to social justice, and if we relate that to SDG, what do the numbers actually say, according to the UN? Because they are measurable. And then at the end of the day, the UN's goal, the current goals that we are in for the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, the goals are for 2030, for the year 2030. So the UN's 2030 targets versus Eritrea's numbers so far. But to make it fair, how do they compare with the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa as a whole? So that's what this video is about today. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to the program. Okay, let's jump right into it. We're going to be talking about the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. I know the subject sounds boring, talk about economic numbers and so on. So I understand that, but trust me, I kept it very simple, to the point, and the entire program, as you can see, it's a short video. So we'll get to what we need to do quickly and in a manner where what's the bottom line. So that's what our focus is going to be. But since we're going to be measurable, we're going to be talking about numbers, but don't let that scare you. Then, also, do not let this intimidate you, but it's actually interesting. So, at the end of the day, the SDG, the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, they break them down into what matters, and they call them 1, 2, 3, which means SDG 1, SDG 2, meaning Sustainable Development Goal 1, Sustainable Development Goal 2, and so on. And they cover, for example, the 1 is about poverty, 2 is about food or elimination of hunger, 3 is about healthcare, 4 is about education, and so on. So We will not go into every detail of it, but into the details that matter. So to keep it brief, and for the most part, especially for developing nations, it's on those areas that really matter. So we're going to cover that. And speaking of simpler, do not let these numbers confuse or intimidate either, because even here it's going to be to the point. At the end of the day, there are indicators of where are we on poverty, on healthcare, and so on, and we're going to compare them to the UN's 2030 targets, what Eritrea's numbers say, and next to it will be SSA, Sub-Saharan Africa average. So on average, for Sub-Saharan Africa countries, there's a number, and we're going to compare Eritrea's number to that. And at the end of the day, the verdict is Eritrea doing better or worse compared to her peers, generally speaking, the Sub-Saharan Africa countries? It's as simple as that. Now, having said that, I think it's important to have some context, a bigger context. First of all, Sub-Saharan Africa. Why Sub-Saharan Africa? And what do we mean by Sub-Saharan Africa? I think we're basically going to use what the rest of the world says are Sub-Saharan African countries. It basically removes the North Africa and the Arab countries of Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, and so on. And everything below that is supposed to be Sub-Saharan Africa, below the Saharan. And with some... they include Sudan. Some of them don't. They include they make Sudan part of the Arab world. I'm not sure what is the case and what is appropriate. But at the end of the day, when we mean Sub-Saharan Africa, we mean all those countries, and that's what we're going to compare Eritrea against, for context. And within those Sub-Saharan African countries, there are 48 countries in them, with a total population of about 1.22 billion people. The average population for Sub-Saharan African countries, this is according to some AI data here, about 24, 25 million people. So relatively, now compare that to Eritrea, population-wise, we are talking about, I don't know, between maybe 4 to 6 million, whatever the official is. So Eritrea is much smaller in population. Then the number of years, I also included the number of years those countries on average have been independent, because at the end of the day, it will not be a comparison of apple to apple. But for fairness sake, on average, these countries have been independent now for over 60 years, 62 years to be exact on average. Now let's compare that against Eritrea's 32 years of independence. Now, as I mentioned, Eritrea, 32 years of independence and counting. Now, another context to add to that is for them, since 1998, for the last more than a quarter of a century, Eritrea also has been either at war or in a war situation, in a conflict situation, or a war, no peace situation. Generally, not at a peacetime at all since 1998. Then a couple of sanctions to add to that. The UN sanctions that lasted between about 9 years, almost a decade, between 2009 and 2018. And then right now, even though it's at a much smaller scale, there is the unilateral US sanctions, which pretty much overarching makes it less ideal to do business with Eritrea because of that. So let's give that as a context as well. And I'm not sure if the Eritrean government uses this as an actual excuse or to explain. But at the end of the day, for me, if I'm going to compare Eritrea's numbers, I have to make sure that I have to keep this in mind and make sure that you, my audience, also are aware of what method that I'm using. So far so good. Let's just jump right to it now. Okay, let's get to SDG 1, which deals with basically what they call no poverty. So according to the UN, by the year 2030, the target that they set for the rest of the world is to eliminate poverty, or what they call extreme poverty. And they measure that the international poverty line now is $2.15 per day, which means anybody who earns below that is considered in that zone. And so the measure is the estimated percentage of a population that actually is below that line. Now, for Eritrea, the estimated one is 35%. But for the Sub-Saharan Africa countries on average, it's actually higher than that. It's 40 to 45. So relatively speaking, Eritrea is closer to the UN goal than the rest of the region. Now, the outcome in this case, definitely when we say we're going to be using the green, yellow, red buttons here, which means Eritrea is in this regard doing better, but we are not going to delve deep into the numbers, because when you go deeper is where you get the details. But in this case, something that to actually a pattern that to keep noticing is it's not about the where the poverty line is. It's actually at the end of the day the distribution of income levels. So in Eritrea, there is actually more equality between the lower and the higher income. So whereas in some, especially the fast-growing African economies, that's where the problem lies. Even when they improve their poverty level, there is a huge gap between rich and poor. But we're not going to delve into the details like that for today. Let's just keep it to the point. As far as the UN is concerned, SDG 1 is concerned, as far as the elimination of poverty is concerned, Eritrea is doing better. And also another context to add to this is, actually, where was this number 20 years ago, 30 years ago? Another detail, another context. And for Eritrea, this was much higher. And the fact that it's actually at this level at this time, it's actually a very good news. Let's move on to the second one, or what they call the SDG 2. And again, just like poverty, according to the UN, by 2030, they want what they call zero hunger. Now, the focus is on children, and it means, and they measure two metrics of something they call stunting and wasting, something that is about, I think they measure height and weight. I'm not going to go into the details of that, and I actually don't have deep expertise in what they actually say, but that's how they measure everyone. And they give it, the target is, even though it is zero hunger, it will probably never be zero, not anytime soon for the rest of the world. And by that, they mean less than 5% of the population in that zone. Now, again, I'm not going to go into the details of, but this is a publicly available data of percentages reporting. I don't know if the countries actually report them or if the UN has a better way of measuring things. At the end of the day, for Sub-Saharan Africa, even including Eritrea's numbers, on average, Eritrea is not doing as much. If they are measuring stunting, for example, I don't know if race, ethnicity, things like that are kept into consideration here. But the bottom line is there is room for improvement there for Eritrea, definitely, when it comes to the elimination of that. And regarding hunger, on the wasting side, I think this is actually something to do with the weight of children and so on. Eritrea is actually doing much better. In fact, if you look at the numbers, if the goal is to hit below 5% by the year 2030, they are actually within reach. 12 to 14% now. Maybe we will reach them, maybe not. But if things go in that direction, and again, if you look at these numbers of where they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you'll really be surprised. So that is what the metrics say. And we're going to just let the numbers tell the bigger story. Moving on to SDG 3. And this is overall, it's about healthcare. It's about distribution of healthcare, availability of healthcare, and so on. And again, the focus is on maternity and mortality for children. And this is actually one of Eritrea's biggest achievements. In fact, if you really delve into the story of improvement of healthcare over the last, since independence, and especially the last 10 to 15 years, this is one of Eritrea's strongest areas. Now, the UN targets infant mortality rate to be less than 20, what they call less than 25, less than 25 deaths for 1,000 births. And as we see Eritrea's numbers, between 38 to 42 is much, much better, much closer than the average for Sub-Saharan Africa, where it's actually 70 to 72. And Eritrea's numbers were above those, I believe 10, 15 years ago, I think it was like 90. And now it is really getting closer to the target. So huge improvement, and it actually makes sense on why that is. But this is a major difference. For maternity, also this is about maternal deaths. It's still, closer to the average for the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa. What the UN set as a target is pretty low, and that's quite ambitious. I'm not sure if any of them are actually going to be able to reach that number anytime soon. But that actually is room for improvement there. And then there's the immunization. When they talk about immunization of what they call the DTP3s, the benchmark is they can't say 100%, so they put that 90, above 90 for UN target above, and Eritrea's numbers are basically they meet that. It's almost universally immunization target achieved. Compare that to 76% for Sub-Saharan Africa. So this again is where Eritrea can proudly say it meets the UN benchmark here. Now, what is that a measure of at the end of the day? It's about preventive care, about community-based health system, not necessarily the highest technology or what you have available in referral hospitals or hospitals in bigger cities, but the actual distribution of availability of healthcare, immunization, health workers in rural areas. And this is actually where Eritrea shines, and great achievements here. Moving on, when we talk about healthcare, each country have their own healthcare system. But to keep in mind, because we are comparing numbers, but we're not telling the entire story. But at the end of the day, Eritrea's biggest story is healthcare is essentially free for everyone. We it at the major hospitals or small clinics for preventative, for anything that requires surgeries, any lab tests, and so on. It is actually free. So the fact that to maintain a free healthcare system and the distribution of healthcare, or the system that starts from community-based and then regional-based and then larger referral hospitals, and then, of course, the major hospitals, there is this setup that serves the from nomadic communities to metropolitan areas, and throughout it's free. Now, to have a free means, there's the infrastructure of it, the human resources of it, the doctors, the nurses, the healthcare assistants. So all to have that entire system and actually maintain a free universal system is actually pretty impressive, especially for a small country with a growing economy. So that's one part that we shouldn't forget. Moving on to education. Now, again, let's focus on what does the UN actually measure. They measure what they call two primary areas, like the primary and secondary education. And by secondary education, it's not clear to me whether the universities are included in that figure. I think they are. But at the end of the day, what matters is when you focus on children, because just like the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa, Eritrea's population is 50% under 18. So with that measure, the enrollment measure for primary school students, 90 to 95%, almost 100%. And the UN target is, of course, 100% there. Eritrea is very close to achieving that. And compare that to the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa, between 78 to 82%. So on that regard, great. Now, when they compare it to secondary education, I believe universities are included in UN's numbers, but the rest of you who know more can correct us here. According to this, there is the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa is doing a little better, but in what measure I don't understand. Are they by primary? Are they measuring from K to 6 and then from 8th grade and so on as secondary, or all the way to the university? Details, let's leave that to the experts. But at the end of the day, Eritrea is doing really great with the primary education. Definitely room for improvement on the rest of it. Again, just like healthcare, education is also free, virtually free. Now, the UN probably does not have a metrics of what is the cost of education, how much do you have to pay to be educated. But if that was the case, I think the Eritrea's story would be actually even would be a much better story, or a better highlight. But it's obvious, especially in Eritrea, the challenge of creating access to tertiary education after high school, after secondary school, is quite challenging. There are enough colleges. I mean, there are colleges that provide that, but obviously not enough. And especially when you have a large, at the bottom of the pyramid, enrollment is really increased. The number of primary school students have really, the percentage of primary school access, or the penetration ratio for that, is really high. So at some point, you want everyone to have access to university level education. And of course, that's for a lot of third world countries, a lot of African countries, a lot of Sub-Saharan African countries. It is quite challenging, but the fact that it's also provided free at every level, all the way to the university level, is also very impressive. Then, related to this is the gender equality overall. Gender equality is not about access to education only, even though when you talk about the male to female access ratio, or the ratio between boys and girls attending primary school, it's really improving for Eritrea, especially the last 10 years. If you look at the numbers, very good. Now, but when the UN talks about gender equality for SDG 5, what their focus is first of all on child marriage. That is there equality how you treat your boys and girls, your men and women, your males and females. But bottom line is, in Eritrea today, child marriage is illegal. Minimum age is 18, no exceptions, and the benchmark that helps that is actually one of those. So by the legal part for child marriage, of course, the UN wants that to be illegal everywhere. It definitely is in Eritrea. But when they actually collect the data, now without boring you about numbers here, one thing that I noticed, and I think that we also have to keep in mind whenever we see this internationally aggregated data, is if you ask women in Eritrea who are in their 70s and 80s and how old they were when they got married, the average number for the country will definitely drop, because at that time, the acceptance of culturally, legally was different. So if you survey the entire population, the story would be different. What matters is how is it now for those who are growing and coming of age today. And so by doing that, if you focus on the under 30, under 25 population, there is actually the parity is much better. Now, this is actually essentially, at the end of the day, it's a measure of the country's culture more than what. Yes, the government actually had a lot of role to play. It actually, especially with rural communities, and it actually has to fight or to push back against backward culture for the most part, and definitely it's not easy. But overall, in Eritrea, starting from even during the liberation movement, uh, maybe 30% or so of the fighting force of the liberation fighters were women. So that actually had a lot of impacts over the last 30, 40, 50 years. A lot of improvement that we see. But overall, culturally, Eritrea is kind of a more gender-wise, a more equal society. So that's also a reflection of that. But at the end of the day, as far as SDG 5 is concerned, it meets it because the target is one, as they call it, and numbers show for themselves. And what is actually interesting and pleasing, and we probably see that the trend throughout the world, a lot of in the colleges and universities, the number of young ladies attending and graduating is now, if you look at 2023, 2024 numbers in Eritrea also, the numbers are actually almost as equal as men. And does this mean that if the trend continues, that we'll actually see more majority women attending? Maybe not anytime soon. But the story of where it was to where it is now, it's day and night. So as far as equality is concerned, I think Eritrea is definitely a good example. The Eritrean society is a great example in this. Now, moving on to SDG 6 and 7. Remember, it includes so far, if you have, we talked about poverty and education and healthcare. So the SDGs they are about human development, and as we all know, the entire story is, if you can talk about freedom and justice and democracy, but if it doesn't include all this, what good is it anyway? So I'm glad they are using the UN is using this kind of measures. So. Again, don't ask me on exactly how they measure them, but this is how the numbers show. This is how countries are measured against each other. So, combining SDG 6 and 7, SDG 6 is more about access to clean water and sanitation. It's one measure, and then the 7 is electricity, and they combine them because at the end of the day, it's just water and electricity to give a developed, healthy family. So access to drinking water. For each of these, sanitation, electricity, drinking water, the UN is targeting 100% access. Again, it's going to be very challenging because not a whole lot of them will be able to achieve that. But let's break it down. On the drinking water access, they're giving Eritrea 75 to 80%, which gives it ahead of its peers, between 65 to 70 for Sub-Saharan Africa countries. And I think when they mean sanitation, they literally mean number of available toilets and plumbing and so on. Again, don't quote me on that, but at the end of the day, it's related to drinking water and sanitation are related. So again, if you look at the numbers between 20-25% to 30% for Sub-Saharan Africa, Eritrea lags behind. And to me, it's very understandable, especially given where we are today. Then access to electricity, same thing. The UN is targeting for 100%. It says here roughly about 50% of Eritrea has access, which is a little below as we compare the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa. Again, if you look at the trend for the last 10 years, Eritrea has a good chance actually to quickly leapfrog because it's a small country with a small population and relatively the rest of the infrastructure has a base. So for Eritrea to reach to maybe not 100%, but to reach 70-80% soon is very doable. Moving on to SDG. Well, again, I think it would be amiss if I don't mention the vast majority or the biggest achievement we can say of Eritrea has been about this collecting given that it's an arid zone, and the biggest challenge is to rely on farming and drinking that depends on rain. So on rainy years, or when you have enough rain, population is okay. When there is drought, everybody suffers. So to elevate that, to change that, the number of major dams like this, and even smaller dams in local communities, the number that have been built is the sheer number. I think it's close to 1,000. It's been amazing. So now collecting water, not wasting water, Eritrea has been doing really great there. Now to distribute that water so that the sanitation rate, the available, the drinking, access to clean water, for those numbers to improve, it's a matter of distributing this water safely and upgrading infrastructure to distribute this to the rest of the population. So when that is achieved, and because without this, you have nothing. So Eritrea has a great hope in terms of turning that story quickly, because that's a great achievement. Now, let's move on to SDG 8 and 9, and related, but overall they deal with the economy. And the what they measure, what the UN measures is, first of all, what they call decent work. It is availability of jobs, and then how much you are paid. The GDP grows, economy grows. A whole lot of things are included there. And then there is the how much infrastructure and industry and manufacturing you have. So overall, let's just call it the manufacturing or the economy, the measure of the economy. And here, and I am not surprised, this is where Eritrea really lags, given for what transpired over the last couple of decades. Not surprised, but this is where Eritrea really needs focus, attention, help. Especially if the other hurdles are removed. It's just a focus on manufacturing. Let's forget the rest of that, which is how much manufacturing share to GDP of the entire economy. How much is in manufacturing, which means how much does a country can actually make products instead of exporting resources and so on. And that is, you take, if a country has 100 billion in GDP, 6 to 7% of that in manufacturing, that would be 6 to 7%. But on average, for a lot of Sub-Saharan African countries, 10 to 12%, and Eritrea is about half of that. So there's a lot of work to be done there to improve actual manufacturing, and this literally means setting up factories and so on. And then SDG 7 focuses on that. SDG 8 is a measure of the result of that, which is the decent economy grows, jobs, and so on. Now, Eritrea, having been relying on national service to have what it has so far, it actually is going to be starting from the bottom, but I hope over the next few years, a lot of things improve here, because this is where it really, really matters in terms of keeping the young population inside the country and so on. Now, in the mining section, and especially the last decade, it's great improvements, but there are a lot of untapped sector of the economy, especially if the ports are improved. If, from what we hear, there's potential for having major overhauls of the Asa port, the Massawa port. That could really change things, because once you improve that, they will lead to a lot of other manufacturing as well. But the agro industry is also something that I highlighted in previous videos. It's amazing progress. If you look at Halhale and Elaborate and so on, a lot of hope there to really this modern farming that Eritrea has potential for, which is also related to access to water, to the number of dams built and so on. So great potential there, but we have a long way to go. Eritrea has a long way to go. Now, moving on to the last one, which is SDG 16. SDG 16 is what they call the peace and governance, or institutions. Uh, First of all, is the stability, law and order, how peaceful is the country, especially internally. Eritrea has been on kind of in a defensive position and hasn't been in a totally peaceful situation, especially with Ethiopia. That's a different story. But this, as they put it on SDG 16 here, peace, justice, and having strong institutions is a measure of that. Strong government institutions, but I think they also include civic institutions as well. So the indicator, let's break them down. First, violence within the country. Violence, literally, the rate of homicide. How many people actually are killed by other people? How many criminals kill people? And the UN target here is kind of a general, but whatever it is, they want it to be reduced. And Eritrea's homicide rate, and I think especially those who visit Eritrea, those who live in Eritrea know this well, it's almost unheard of, relatively speaking. And when they measure these things, they measure out of 100,000, how many people are reported that. It's quite low, very, very low. And this is where the rest of the Sub-Saharan Africa is also loses it, because especially in some countries, even when their economy is growing, even when their GDP is growing, even when they are doing better with the rest of healthcare, education, and so on, this is where they lose it. This is the violence and crime and so on. So having a stable government is actually a measure of that, because governance, one of the measures of governance, is to be able to administer and to rule and to maintain law and order, including reducing violence. So 10 to 12 per 100,000. This is probably lower than it used to be for the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa as well. But relatively speaking, Eritrea is definitely where crime is not a big issue in Eritrea. Now, when it comes to governance, they talk about institutions, laws, and constitution, and judicial system, and how effective the governing bureaucracy or infrastructure is. And overall, they give Eritrea as a low in that, and I'm not surprised, and then nobody surprised, because there's a lot of things to improve there. And but the story is the same thing for the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa, and overall, so which means relative to the UN target for 2030, and it essentially means what the UN is saying is let's target for having an effective governance, whatever that means, which means better governance or improved governance. Maybe they're talking about technology and so on. So, but they don't have a kind of a quantifiable number to measure this. But whatever it is, Eritrea, including the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa, can say they have effective governance. But hopefully, we will strive towards that soon. But peace and security, how do you measure? How do you measure that at the end of the day? When it comes to peace and security, you more or less feel it than to be able to measure it. And when it comes to the national harmony, and this is especially those who visit Eritrea know this, it's actually a symbol, like a good example of national harmony between religions, how much they get along, not only tolerate each other, but they actually support each other and love each other and so on. And the sense of national unity, national harmony, if that is also a measure of what SDG 16 is measuring, I think Eritrea really, really shines. And then when you go out on streets like Asmara or even in rural areas, day or night, does one feel secure? Do the citizens actually feel secure? Do they have to be afraid of each other, of criminals, or of some other, or somebody who doesn't look like them, somebody who doesn't speak the same language as they do? Do they have to worry about that? And I don't think we have another great example as Eritrea when it comes to this. So this is also, I hope, this is also a measure of how SDG 16 measures countries. As we conclude, now, was it right for the Eritrean government to also include in the agenda, as the Swedish foreign minister visited, to include a briefing about this social justice? Maybe it was requested by Sweden or provided by Eritrea. I'm not sure, but at the end of the day, I think it was a good idea to also highlight when we talk about, for example, justice, or the government talks about social justice. What do we mean by that? Where is Eritrea closing the gap in terms of measurable numbers, and where is it honestly lagging in terms of measurable numbers as well? So when you have this the 360 view of things is actually the better way of looking at these things. And then for the rest of us, every time we talk about justice or things that needs to improve in the economy, and there has to be a measurable way of looking at things, and also a way to compare to others and where they should be, where Eritrea is progressing and where it needs to catch up. So overall, I think we'll see the official reports from both sides again, and maybe they will give us more details. But as far as the agenda of briefing the foreign minister on social justice agenda, hopefully we have a better picture now. And also, the other part is, whatever it is, whatever issues are to be improved with Eritrea, or to be discussed, or to work in partnership, what Eritrea has been pushing toward engagement. Engagement literally means to engage, to sit down and find common ground, to understand each other and find solutions. So what it's been doing, I think the visit of the Swedish foreign minister is also related to this bigger picture of engagement, what it's trying to do with the United States. I think we are seeing great hopes and signs from that as well. What it recently, President Isaias's visit to Saudi Arabia, and also to, even if we look at the last couple of years, including China and Russia and Korea and the rest of African countries, and especially in the neighborhood with Egypt and Sudan and Saudi Arabia, that if it also includes Eritrea's social justice agenda in a manner where the rest of them can actually understand and hopefully contribute to help Eritrea catch up, because it's lagging behind because of a lot of complicated reasons. Some of the reasons we can probably agree to disagree. But at the end of the day, this engagement based on an understanding and explaining, and like we saw in this example where at the minister level, when the Minister of Social Welfare updates foreign dignitaries, foreign leaders about Eritrea's progress, and hopefully, I'm sure it will include lack thereof, is actually great. So we looked at, hopefully you find this helpful in terms of understanding where Eritrea stands and what SDGs are for the UN. Well, that's all I have for today. Thank you for tuning in. If you would like to see more fact-based analysis like this, I invite you to hit subscribe right now. The best way to support this channel is actually by engaging with the content, by liking, sharing, and subscribing, and commenting. And I read all your comments. They shape what I will be talking about next. But for today, I appreciate your support, and I will see you next time.
بس الشمع كبر عدلي عدي رأي خلاني أنس رأي خلاني الرأي رأي خلاني صباح طيكم تخوني